This is Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Mem Vav, and we're holding on Mem Hey Amid Beis. We are 5 lines from the bottom, which the Gemara continues discussing cases of a girl accepting Kiddushin Shaloi L'das Aviyah without the father's knowledge. And of course, this isn't any girl, this is a Ketana. Says the Gemara, Niskat Shaloi L'das Aviyah, V'niseis Shaloi L'das Aviyah. Adds on the Gemara over here that not only was the Kiddushin Shaloi L'das Aviyah, but the Nisuin was as well Shaloi L'das Aviyah. But the case is Va'aviyah kan, but the father is here, meaning he's not B'mdinas Hayam, he's locally, and we can figure out whether he protests or not. Rav Huna Omer says, Rav Huna Omer Cheles. She married a Kayin, she's allowed to eat Truma. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Eino Cheles. She cannot eat Truma. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula, explains Ula, 2 lines on the bottom, Mem Hey Amid Beis, Had Rav Huna. These words of Rav Huna. Rav Huna taught us that what? She's allowed to eat Truma, says Ula. Kechaymetz lishinayim, this is like vinegar to the teeth. Uka'ashon le'inayim, and smoke to the eyes. Explains Ula, why is he so bothered? In the previous case that we quoted, in the case, the previous din of Rav Huna, in which there was just Kiddushin Shaloi L'das Aviyah, and therefore for sure it is valid, it was kosher, and then she did Nisuin Shaloi L'das Aviyah again. In the previous case, it was only half. The first half was L'das Aviyah. And yet, what do we say? Amrit. We said, Lo Yaichla, she can't eat Truma. Hach over here, where everything is Shaloi L'das Aviyah, Lo Kol Shegein. So Ula is bothered. Why in this din could Rav Huna possibly say, Oicheles, that she can eat Truma? And we turn over to Memvav Amid Aleph. Says the Gemara, Ula concludes, Nirin Divrei Talmud. It must be that the Talmud, as the top line, Rashi points out that this is the end of Ula's statement, that it must be the Talmud of Yirmiyah was mistaken in that which his Rebbe said. Nirin Divrei Yirmiyah Shu Talmidei Shel Rav Huna, as Rashi says. Amar Rava, explains the Rava in defense of Rav Huna. My time of the Rav Huna, where did Rav Huna get his din from? She did a Maisi Yisayma, she did something, completely severing herself, completely taking her out of her father's Rishos. As Rashi 3 lines down explains, why is this called a Maisi Yisayma? She did Kidsha Vihisiyat Mashlodata. Ki'ilu Hi Yisayma. It's as if she's a Yasam, she doesn't have a father. She's acting 100% by herself. And that is the reason why, even though in a case, as Rashi continues to explain, on the first and narrow line, it could be over there that maybe the father is upset. But in our case, the father would never have been quiet for such a prolonged period of time, watching his daughter act, we could call it recklessly. But the point is, acting in a way that she's completely taking her out of her father's rishos. And that's the reason, explains Rava, why Ula's din is plausible that she could eat Truma in such a scenario. Continues the Gemara, Itmar, Memvavam and Aleph, the 3rd line. Ketano shenizkat Shaloi L'das Aviyah. A girl did Kiddushin, Amar Rav, says Rav, either she or the father have the ability to back out, not black out, to protest. Ravasi Amar Aviyah V'lohi, just the father. So Eisi Ravuna the Ravasi, Ravuna that said, well, Ravuna doesn't say anything yet. Ravuna previously was speaking, but asked on Ravasi, you said just the father can back out. V'amri l'chiyah b'Rav the Ravasi. Some say it was chiyah b'Rav that asked Ravasi. Im amoyin yimayin Aviyah. If the father surely protests, and from here we learn out, Ein li elo Aviyah, hiyatza minayin. So the simple reading is the father. Where do we know to include even she herself? Tamalemer imoyin yemayin, the double lashain mikol makay. So says the Gemara, we have a clear drasha implying that bein aviyah chayil la'akev. So asks Rav Huna, asks Rav Cheba Rav on Ravasi, why are you saying only aviyah v'lohi? Amar lehu. So Rav responds in deference to Ravasi. You always see the godless in the Gemara. How Rav was he that argued, and now Rav is the one coming to the defense of Ravasi. Says Rav, Loi Tezlu Basal Obcha. Do not follow ideas that are ibcha, that are backwards. Because I can answer you, that the case is, the pasuk is talking about where there was pitoy, there was seduction, shaloi l'sham ishos. Explains the Gemara, 1 second. Pitoy shaloi l'sham ishos, karabai. We need a pasuk to teach us that in such a scenario, she and the father could protest. It's obvious. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak loymar. No, the pasuk is teaching us a fundamental din. Shel mishalim kimas kimifuta. The pasuk is teaching us that there's a din of a kinas. Amrli Rav Yosef. 1 second. Yachi ainu ditanina. That which we learned in a Mishnah. Mahar yimerenu lo liisha. Shetzrichem enu Kiddushin v'impita l'shem ishos. Kiddushin lamali. If the whole pita was for ishos, why would you need Kiddushin? As the pasukim continue to explain. Amrle Abaye, says Abaye, Sricha Kiddushin, Ledas Aviyah. You need, says Abaye, you need Kiddushin in a scenario that the father acquiesces. And we continue with the meaning. It's true that the Peter was L'Shem Ishos, but we still are lacking a Kiddushin in which we know that the father agreed, and that's the reason why we need Kiddushin Ledas Aviyah. And we continue with the Mishnah, and Vavam and Aleph. Says the Mishnah, if someone says to a woman, and this was the Mishnah which we referenced about 2 days ago, and we said we'll come back, we'll learn it in the right place. So says the Mishnah, if someone marries a woman with a date, hands her a date, and then he gives her a second date, and says, marry me with this one. If either one is with a shavapruta, mikudeshes v'imlav, einoi mikudeshes. Bizu. But what happens if he hands her all the dates and he says, marry to me with this one, and with this one. So now he's marrying with all of them. Says the Mishnah, now you need all of them together to be worth the shavapruta. Continues the Mishnah. What happens if she's eating them? She eats the dates as they're being handed to her. Because since she's consuming them as we move along, she's only going to be mikudeshes if one of them is worth a shavapruta. Says the Gemara, Mantana Iskachi. Who's the Tana? Which he says that when he said Hiskachi and then he says Hiskachi again, which is case number 1 in the Mishnah, and we said, as long as one of them was worth a shavapruta, it's mikudeshes. Amar Rabba Rabbi Shimini Damar Achiyoimar Shvua L'chol Echad V'echad. Says Rav Shimon that one has to bring a separate carbon for each time he denies that which he did wrong, unless he made a shvua for each and every one of them. So Rav Shimon is the one, this is the Gemara in Shvuah, says Rashi keys us in on 5 people are claiming against one person and he's denying to all of them. The only way, either he has to bring a carbon, or if he makes a Shvuah to each and every one. So Rav Shimon is the Manda Amar, says the Gemara, as we see that it's considering each one a separate entity. And therefore in our case it's Kachli Bezu, as long as one of them is worth a Shavapruta, he will be Mikudeshes. Whereas, continues the Gemara, 2 dots, 15 lines at the bottom, quoting the next case of the Mishnah, Bezu. Then, in Mishu Kulan Shavapruta, they have to all be worth a Shavapruta. So says the Gemara, Ahai, what case is this going on? If it's going back on the Reisha, now we're not asking on that case, we're asking on the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said she's sitting and eating. So what is that? We had 2 cases in the Mishnah. We had Iskachi, and one of them has to be worth a shavapruta. And then we have bezu, they have to all be worth a shavapruta. Says the Gemara, hi, which case is the finale of the Mishnah that says, if she's eating them, then It's only Mikudeshes if one of them is worth a Shava Pruta. What case? If it's going on the Reisha Marechel Zavilu Munachas Nami. The first case we just said already the din is Das Kachili Bezu Kamar. In the first case we just finished saying that as long as any one of them is worth a Shava Pruta, Mikudeshes, regardless if she's eating it. So what would this be adding on? Ella Seif. Must be going in the Seif of the case of Bezu. Vafilu Bekamaisa. Ask the Gemara. It's going in the Seifa, and seemingly even on the first date, which was worth a Shava Pruta, and she ate it. You're going to tell me she's going to be married? V'hamilvi. But ask the Gemara, when it was being given to her, it should be like a loan, and therefore you cannot get married with a loan. Amar Rav Yochanan, Hare Shochan, Hare Basar, Hare Sakin, Vein Lanu Echol. Says Rav Yochanan, we have everything in front of us. We just don't understand the din. Rav Yochanan commenting on the kasha of the Gemara. What exactly is going on over here? How can it be that she's indeed Mikudeshes if she eats the first date? Before we go on to the Teretz, let's take a moment and look at Rashi. Rashi, towards the end of the narrow line, says, V'amilvihi. Rashi explains, Kivan de Kiddushin Eloi Nigmar Achet Kabli Kulam. Since he's standing there and handing her date, so there's never the act of Kiddushin is not finished until she accepts all of them. She already ate the first one before she finished accepting all the dates. So that's considered like a loan because she's still accepting the rest of it. So ask the Gemara, how could she be Mikudeshes? Explains the Gemara, Rav Shmuel Amri Tarvayu. Really, it's going the first case of the Mishnah. But you ask, why do we have to know this already if each one is with the Shav Prutas Mikudeshes? Explains the Gemara of Lami Bayi Kamar. Loi mi bayi munachas. It's needless to say, in the case of munachas, if she doesn't eat them, Tiga Shav Pruta in. Eloi, loi. That if it's worth the Shav Pruta, she's Mikudeshes, if not. Avaloi Cheles, but in the case in which she's eating it, I would think, perhaps. And he also, since she's bringing that note close, she's consuming the item. Maybe she's giving herself over even without the date being worth a Shava Pruta. Kamash on the Sefer the Mishnah, that's even worth a Shava Pruta. Teretz number 1 of Rav Ushmuel. Teretz number 2 Rav Ami Amar Lama Seifa. Umay Achev Achzat Shava Pruta. Achev Achroina Shava Pruta due to the Kasha. Amar Rav Shma Mina Mid Rav Ami. Talas. For the din of Rav Ami, for the fact that Rav Ami is teaching us that the final date has to be worth a Shava Pruta. Why? Due to the kasha of the Gemara, that if the first day was with a Shava Pruta, it was a halva, it was alone, therefore she should not be Kudeshes. Says the Gemara, you learn from the din of Rav Ami 3 dinim. Shema Mina, number 1, Hamekadish Milvein Mikudeshes. And that's why we have to say it's the last one. Shema Mina, Hamekadish Milva O Pruta, Taita Pruta. But then we also see that even though the first part was a milva, the end of these dates, that was an actual pruta. So we see if you're marrying a woman with both, alone and with a pruta, what do we see? We see that the das on the pruta, and therefore it is mikudeshes. Ushma mina number 3, as we turn over to men vavam beis, ma'is ba'almim chayzrim. That money on its own goes back. We see from over here that money has to go back, as Rashi points out. Kol Kiddushin, she'einon Kiddushin, lo yamrinon ma'is matana. We don't say a fundamental shayla, if a man gives a woman something in for Kiddushin, it doesn't work. We don't say he has in mind that it should be a gift, and therefore anyways it would be a good Kiddushin. That's why we're calling it a milveh, for the fact that must be that the mais that the husband gave was not in mind to be a matana, but rather to be a milveh. Continues the Gemara, Menvav Amid Beis, top line. Itmar, says the Gemara, Hamekadesh be'achayisa, if someone marries his sister, gives her money, Rav Amar Ma'is Chayzrin. Rav says you can't marry your sister, the money goes back. Shmuel Amar, true, you can't marry your sister. But it's so obvious that you can't marry your sister, therefore Ma'is Matani giving her a gift. Explains the Gemara. Rav Amar Ma'is Chayzrin, everyone knows you can't marry your sister. And therefore, why do you give her money? The government also should be good, and he had in mind it should be a deposit, a security by her. V'leim Allah, asked the Gemara, so why don't you just tell her it should be Gadain? Savar lemekabel thinks she'll never accept this as collateral. Shmuel Savar, no. Ma'is matana. Everyone knows you can't get married to your sister. Therefore, you had a mind to be a matana. Says the Gemara, the same kasha name of the matana. Savar ksefel milsa. She's going to be embarrassed to accept it. So fundamental machlokes Rav and Shmuel, when one quote unquote marries his sister, it's clear that he doesn't mean to marry her. Everyone knows this is the quintessential example. You should know all of Torah, like that your sister is usher to you, that you can't marry her. Says the Gemara, so why do you quote unquote marry his sister? Clearly he wants to give her money. Why do you want to give her money? Rav says he wants to give her money as a collateral, therefore the money goes back. Shmuel says no, he's trying to give her a present, therefore the money does not go back. Masiv, Ravina asks Ravina the din of Shmuel, that the money is a matana. Asks Ravina, 10 lines down, Mevam the base, first one line is Masiv. Hamavish chalosai kemach. Someone separates challah from his flour, from the raw ingredients, not the finished dough. Einay challah doesn't work. Vegezel biyad kain. And if he gives it to the kain, it's gezela, quote unquote, in the hands of the kain, because it's not actually challah. Asks the Gemara of my gezel biyad kain. Why are we saying it's gezel neima? Why don't we say a similar svara to Shmuel? Say, everyone knows you can't take a flour as challah. Therefore, why did he do this? He just did this as a matana. What do we see? We see that when people give things, even though they know they can't give them, it's not actually a matana. Explains the Gemara, no kasha. Shiny awesome in the case of challah, tenafik chorba minei. Because in such a scenario, if we were to allow the kohen to keep it, it would cause a destruction. Why? The kohen himself might have less than a fifth chamesh reviim. The math here gets a little bit sticky. The kohen himself might have a little bit less than 5/4 of a kav of flour. V'hai, and this little bit that he just got, and he mixed it together with other flours. Because savar, and the kohen thinks and the kohen thinks that this all combines together and it's all considered challah. And what's going to have us a michla tivla? And the kohen himself is not going to take off the appropriate Trumais and Meisers in such a scenario. Therefore, says the Gemara, that's the reason why you can't give it to the kohen. Basically, what's going on over here is when the kohen receives challah, let's say better. In this case, what the kohen received is tevel, because the person had an obligation to take of challah and he didn't. So he essentially gives the kohen flour, which is tevel, and the kohen is not going to be fixing this flour, and he's going to end up eating something that's not kosher. And therefore, that's the reason why we're not going to let this happen. It's not necessarily kasha and Shmuel. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But Amr, you just said, everyone knows this can't happen. So the kohen must know that it's tevel. Says the Gemara, he knows he doesn't know. That everyone knows. However, he doesn't really know the summertime. He thinks what's the reason the kohen. He thinks the reason is because the kohen is going to bother too much if you give him the flour. The kohen and he'll be moichel that tircha, and he'll be moichel that tircha, and that's why we could potentially come out a catastrophic scenario. And that's why he says the Gemara, you can't do this. But it's not a kasha at Shmuel. Ask the Gemara 1 second. V'tevi truma. Why don't we say? Why are you telling me that the kohen has to give back the flour? Let the kohen be considered truma. And the kohen won't eat it till the kohen takes some challah from somewhere else. Why are you telling me it's called tevel? Did we not learn that if someone took off challah from a nakov, a perforated flower pot, truma, from an unperforated flower pot, nakov, truma, so why don't we say the same thing over here? Why are we saying that over here the din is that it reverts back? Why don't we say it's good old-fashioned truma in the hands of the kohen, and then the kohen will go and he'll temporary challah from somewhere else on this? Says the Gemara, betray money sayis. When it's two different utensils, like in the case of the flower pot, sayis, the kohen will listen and he'll understand what to do. But chan mana lo sayis, he's not going to listen, he's going to get confused. Maybe the kohen will really listen. He's going to think that it's good. I've amrit the same kasha. You just told me I do the Hashem Avishachal Kamach. Answers the Gemara Yodei Hashem Avishachal Kamach. However, Veini Yodei this every time I mention Derech the Kohen Kabla Alei same kasha v'tevei Truma v'yachsav v'yitzray Miloi Tanan. Do we not learn Mishenu Nakav al Nakov Truma v'yachsav v'yitzray Hakem na b'chei Mani Tzayis v'chamani lo Tzayis. Says the Gemara, and of course it's all just an interlude just to get this final kasha. Is it true that you're going to tell me the Kohen's not going to listen about Tanan? I tell him Kishos and him Samara. Avtiach and him Saruach. If someone separated different entities by mistake, if he separated a Truma and it was bitter, or it was spoiled, he separated a melon of Avtiach and it was Saruach who was spoiled. Truma v'yachsav v'yitzray. And we don't say over there the Kohen's not going to listen. Shiny Hasam de Midaraisa. Truma Mali, he really works. Midaravaloi. Damravaloi, Menayin Latarmin Arali, Afeshu Dumasa Truma. If you separate Truma from something good and bad and good, it works. Trumasa Truma Shnemar. So if it didn't actually work, what's Nesias Chay Lama? Mikan Latarmin Arali, Afeshu Trumasai Truma. Therefore, over there, it's only concerned to Rabbanan, we're not worried that the Kohen's not going to listen. But in our case, it's more of a real concern, and that's the reason why we're not going to allow the kohen to keep this challah. Again, we got involved in this lengthy discussion, just as Kasha and Shmuel, who said, it's a matana. We thought this proved it's not a matana, because you also know you can't give challah, and yet it said the kohen has to give it back. The Gemara answered the Kasha. We'll just end off with the disclaimer. Taking of challah is not just from challah, it's any time you use the requisite amount of flour, 5 pounds with a bracha, 3.65 without a bracha, 2.25 even you have to take of challah, even from any baked good that has that requisite quantity of flour. Have a fabulous day.